So we're now back to one of them topics like the box model and things like that that basically allow you to start really laying out a page, and that's floating elements. Now, first of all, I'm just going to talk about why floating elements is hacky and why we've just had to do it, and sort of a little brief history of web design so far. So previously what we would do is we'd use tables to lay things out. So, for example, a table looks like the following. It's basically tabulated data, and we can still use tables. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't use tables, because you can. A table element will look like this. You'll have table rows. I mean, you can, typically if you're laying out a table, you would have a T head, like so, and you would have a T body, like so, T body. And then in a T head, you'd have TH elements, which are basically table headers. So I can say column 1, and I can duplicate that down and say column 2 and column 3. And in here, we would have table rows, and within these, we would have table data. So in here, I could say 1, 2, 3, and then I could duplicate this along if I wanted to. But these relate to the headers, so basically you end up with something like that, column 1, 2, 3, and you can add more data in there as you need. Let me just zoom out a little bit. There we go. So that's basically tables, and previously what we'd do is, let's say, by the end of this video, we're going to essentially have a box here, and a box next to it, and then another box next to it. So it was sort of like a 3-column layout kind of thing. Now, previously, we would do something like this. Table row, and we would have table data here, and this would be the first column, or the box rather. That would be the second one, like that. So we'd have 1, 2, 3, and then we'd apply loads of hacky styles to this, basically just to make it into a layout. As you can tell, it's not a very good solution, but it's what people used to do. So instead, what we're going to do is an not equally hacky, but still a hacky solution, because we don't have things like Flexbox layout CSS modules available to all browsers yet. So we have to make do with floats. Now, what we're going to do now, you probably after this series won't want to carry on doing, but it's important to understand the basics behind floats. Because what we're going to be doing later on is actually looking at grid systems, which are predefined systems that allow you to mark up your page and have basically a full page layout ready for you. And most web designers or web developers, whatever you want to call them, will do this. They'll utilize these grid systems because they're tried and tested pieces of code that just work really well for laying out a web page, until we have better support for things like Flexbox. So, in this video, we're going to look at the basics of floats. We're going to look at clear fixing, which is a really important concept when we're dealing with floats. So let's go ahead and do so. So I'm going to create a div with a class of container. And we are going to give this a background color. So in here, let's say container background color. And let's say green. An awful green color. Now, it doesn't have anything in there at the moment, so it's sort of squashed almost. It's flat. But then there you can see we've got this this box. So what we're now going to do is I'm going to create 3 elements in here. 1, and this is going to be, I don't know, box. 2, 3. 2 and 3. So let's say you had a container and you wanted 3 boxes to sit next to each other. So essentially you want 1 box here, 1 box here, and 1 box here, and you want them to span the entire width of the page. In actual fact, to keep things simple, let's use 4 boxes, because we can put them at 25% width each, and this is where we're coming on to sort of percentages. So each of these boxes we want to float left, and floating will just literally float the element to either left or right. Basically, you've got no other choice. So for example, let's create a div here, and let's say class float left, and let's say floated left. And you can imagine that something with a class of float left, and we use the float property in CSS and we say left, that's going to float that left, but it's not really done much because the element naturally sits on the left hand side. If we were to do float right though, that's going to put that over the other side of the page. It's floated to the right of the page. So this is really typically for things like images within articles. You might want to put an image over the right hand side and then have the text wrapped around it. So this is typically how we would do this. But we're going to use this for sort of layout here. So let's go back to our previous example. So these boxes are all going to have a certain, so I'm going to say container box. In fact, let's call these columns or column. So we have 4 columns like so. So we've got these columns. Let's add some styles to them. So we're going to say I want these to be a, oh no, we won't say width. We'll say background of black. And we'll say color of white. And then in a minute we'll look at adding other properties. So what we've now got is 4 elements that are block level elements. So they're spanning the entire width of the parent container, which is green. So having the background color of black on these has completely eliminated the ability to see the green background. What we want is these to sit next to each other. So all I'm going to do is I'm down here, I'm going to say float left. You don't have to do a space between these, by the way. I'm just doing it to separate them. Okay, so this, you know, what's happened here? You'd expect to be confused by something like this because it's so silly. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense what's going on here. What's actually happened is a couple of things. We've floated these elements left, but we've not given them a particular width. So what's happened is because they are contain this text here, this 1, 2, 3, and 4. What's happened is it's just all collapsed against itself. And the other thing that's happened is the container has disappeared because what we're doing is we're floating elements, but we're not clearing the floats, and we need to clear floats. We'll look at that in just a moment. And then in the next video, we're going to look at a solution, a very small solution that you can add a class onto elements to clear fix things. And we'll talk about that later, but we'll add a very simple solution here for now. So the first thing to do really, in my opinion, is just to set the widths of the columns, just so we can see how these look. So because we've got 4 elements here, we know that we can set these to a width of 25%. 4 times 25 is 100. 100% will be 100% width of the container. So now these are equally spread out along the page. Perfect. So we've now got 4 columns to our page. So for example, we could do something like add some lorem ipsum in each one. Like so. And there we go. Okay, so we've got 4 elements on the page here. Now when we pull our container in, you can see that it's actually responding quite nicely. Because they are at 25% width, it's pulling in and it's not really affecting too much. It gets to the point where it's probably going to be unreadable, but that doesn't really matter for now. We can deal with that when we look at a responsive design a little bit later on. And we look at our particular grid systems which deal with this really, really well. And the reason this is reacting a little bit slowly, by the way, is because I have my developer tools open. Once I close these, you can see how nice that actually looks. So down to about there, it's sort of unreadable. Okay, so we've established how to float things, but now we've got the problem with the following. Just under here, because this one's a little bit less, we should be seeing the green background. And we're not seeing the green background at the moment. Now, if I was to, I can change this example really. We've already looked at how we can lay out columns, so you can apply the clear fix to that in a minute. If I was to have, say, 2 containers here, I have a left one and I'll have a right one. So this is left and this is right, and I'll get rid of this and I'll say container left, float left, and container right, float right. So float right obviously floats things right, and float left floats things left. And for both of these, so let's say container left and container right, we'll set a background of green, no, not green, because we've already done that for the outer container, red, for example, and a color of white. Okay, so you'll notice that these have a background, but where's the green container gone? If we were to remove these and just put some text in there, that green container still exists, so where are they going? Well, as with the previous example, the container is actually collapsing. And in actual fact, let's set the width of these to 100 and the height of these to 100 pixels as well. So we should see the middle of this as green because technically the container is surrounding it. And we can check this out using Chrome DevTools. If we hover over the container, you see that it basically doesn't exist. It's almost like it's flattened and it's completely been removed from the page. There's a couple of ways we can remedy this. We could set a height if we wanted to, but that's really annoying because if, for example, the left or the right-hand container change in height, the container doesn't follow, which is a little bit annoying. So we need to use something called a clear fix or clearing floats. So we're going to look at the after pseudo element here. There are a couple of ways we can do this. We can create an element called clear, and we could say clear. Now the clear property will clear either a left or a right float, but it's almost going to always be that you use both, so clear both. So what you could do is you could add, say, a span element here, and we'll look at a problem with using a span element in just a moment. So we could say span class equals clear. That's going to clear both of the floats. Now it won't actually do anything at the moment. You see that it takes no effect. That's because a span is a display of inline, and it needs to be a display of block to be able to actually work. So when we refresh, you see that this clear has now cleared the floats, and it allows the container to sit at its natural height. And that then means that if we change the height of an element, the height of the container changes naturally. This is what we'd expect. So we can do this, but this is a little bit of a annoying solution. Why? Because we're adding additional markup to our page where it does not make sense. It's not semantically making sense. Clear fixing is a presentational issue. It's not an issue with the HTML. So we want to keep this to the presentation layer, e.g. the CSS. So we can get rid of this. And what we can do is we can say container, down here, container after content nothing. So this basically allows us, this is a pseudo element, not a pseudo select, this is a pseudo element. It basically adds an element after the container, so you can sort of see where I'm going with this. It won't add it after the container, it'll add it just in here, so the last thing before the container ends. So if I was to type in like blah there or something like that, you'll see that you basically get blah added to, and if we look in here, there's the after pseudo element. So rather than saying content blah, we'll just say content nothing because we sort of have to use content for this. We're going to say display block, and we're going to say clear both. And then, because we've done that, we're effectively creating a pseudo element with a clear fix like we did before, and there we get rid of the problem. Now the only problem with this solution, again, is that what we're going to have to do now is for every element we want to clear fix, let's say we have another container, okay, with other styles, and we need to do the same clear fix. We're not going to want to do another container after and then paste that in. That's just really silly. We're duplicating code too much. So what we're going to do is we're not going to do any of these solutions at all. So we're going to get rid of that. We're back to the same problem. In the next video, we're going to look at a solution where we create a specific class that deals with clear fixing, and then we can add it to the markup. Again, it's not markup that we're adding, we're just adding an additional class to then, on the presentation side of things, act and actually make a clear fix. So let's look at that next.